What did you discover how to make recently?
Lemonade.
Can you say it louder?
Lemonade.
Can you say it less loud?
Lemonade.
Oh, wow. How do you make lemonade?
With lemons and oranges.
Welcome to Toddling the Stacks, a human-produced children's literature podcast where we delve the archive for forgotten treasures to help you make sense of this impossibly large body of work and, hopefully, find some new favorites for your kid. I'm your host, Sean, an Ivy League English PhD with a toddler girl called Adeline, who is somehow even more critical of books than I am. Today we're going to be looking at 2025's The Gathering Table, which is written by Antoine Eady and illustrated by London Ladd. And that is a name that is absolutely on the top of our coolest names ever list. And if you're being honest, it's on the top of yours too. So pumped about that. This episode comes out just a few days before Juneteenth, and we hope that you're planning a joyous celebration filled with delicious food and with those that you and your little love. Addie is always excited for holiday gatherings, and while she can't help with the grill quite yet, we're going to see maybe if she's ready to grate some cheese for mac and cheese, and she's always up for unwrapping butter and measuring flour and milk. Lately, she's been obsessed with making lemonade, too. She never really had juice before, but we got it into our heads that she might like to try lemonade, and she's been using the juice press on it, and she's just gone wild for lemonade. So no doubt she'll be manning that citrus press again before the holiday. She may be too young to understand the why of Juneteenth, but she definitely understands love, and she understands that cooking for others is one way that we reify that out into the world. So I think that she understands the what of the holiday too. To be clear, she doesn't know what the word reify means either, and that's okay. Neither do a lot of folks that use it on the regular. It comes from the fifth declension Latin noun race, which is strangely not where we get the word race from, and it just means thing. You might know it from the phrase res publica, meaning the public thing, and that is where we get our word republic, which is something, of course, that is playing deeply into the meaning of Juneteenth. To reify something is to turn it from an abstract into a concrete, from something like a feeling into something tangible. And for that, think of the way that like a wedding ring becomes the physical form of the broad idea of marriage, right? And kids kind of live in concretes. And that can make holidays difficult. On Christmas, I can say that we're celebrating Jesus' birthday. And Jesus is a character in her pretty pink Bible. So explaining that is okay. But explaining more than that, salvation, original sin, hard. Explaining that Easter is the day that Jesus came back from the dead, and also that there's lots of chocolate bunnies, real hard. So then imagine explaining that when her grandfather's grandfather was alive, some people used to own other people the same way that she owns her toys, and that folks had to fight a war about it to get them to stop. There's nothing I could say that would make her believe that. And in some ways, thank God, right? But in other ways, good Lord, do we still have so much work to do? When we went looking for a book to introduce Juneteenth to Adeline, our local librarians were there for us, as they always are. They had a wonderful display set up with tons of options, so while she played, I browsed them. The Gathering Table won out because it doesn't mention slavery, and it doesn't mention the Civil War, and it doesn't mention emancipation and the federal troops' long journey to Texas. And you might think, gee, Sean, can't you hear how problematic that sounds? And maybe. But maybe it's also just recuperative, a refusal to allow the generational pain of slavery to define the present. But either way, listen, children's books are generally written for kids aged 2 to 8. And in terms of cognitive ability, that age range is bigger than the price range of a G-Class Mercedes. This one is for younger kids who can't possibly get the history of Juneteenth, and it shines very brightly in that role. Instead, The Gathering Table focuses on an actual table, the one around which the family of our very young narrator gathered during important events and holidays. It's an idyllic table, settled outdoors under a large birch tree hung with Spanish moss, around which no one sits and everyone stands. The story takes the form of a kind of prose poem which walks the reader through what are ultimately mostly suggestions of those moments. Around the table, we know for sure the narrator's grandparents are honored for the family they've built, and that his uncle is able to marry another man. The rest of the celebrations are more generalized. Fireworks at the New Year, the appearance of a baby sister suggesting that folks are gathered to celebrate her birth. But for the most part, things are left open and undefined. I suspect that this is for two reasons. One, I'll defer until the analysis, but the second is simply that, as I've suggested, this is how holiday celebrations are for young people. The whys are poorly understood, but they get the whats: family, food, love. That's what's mostly on display in the gathering table. The love the narrator's family shows one another when they gather. The importance of breaking bread together in the same place year after year, time after time. The premiums placed on community and generosity, on acceptance, and on building fellowship. The gathering table is set in the low country of South Carolina and Georgia, among the most beautiful places in the U.S. And Ladd's verdant illustrations do them a surprising justice, such that I suspect any native might recognize them as their home turf without further context. The landscapes are deeply impressionistic, obsessed with the dappled light reflected by watery marshes and filtering through moss and leaves. There's scarcely a single sky whose blue isn't filtered through some golden hour purples and pinks. The people are a bit different. Their faces are more firmly defined and yet still in transit somehow, unpinpointable. Taken from a distance, they become more abstract, more like collage, like simulacra or chimera rather than fully fleshed people. In the middle distance, they're more fully defined, though there remains something generalized about their expressions. The narrator alone seems fully fleshed, and this again I think is an accurate representation of childhood. Many of us never outgrow the belief that we are alone or the recipients of fully thought and felt lives. But I specifically want to take a moment to reflect on my favorite illustration of the bunch, the low country boil against which we only see hands. I'm from Maryland, and our traditions are a bit different. Often it's just crabs that are dumped onto the paper. It's replication with difference. But if you've never had the chance to enjoy eating this way, I hope that you do. There's a magic to the slow labor of picking crabs, shelling shrimp, and spending an afternoon in the act of eating with brown glass bottles of long-necked beer and rolls of paper towels at the ready. With good friends and family, I can hardly think of a thing I'd rather do. And Ladd's full-page spread reifies, there's that word again, the event in a way that's wholly poster-worthy, honestly. So, in thinking about this book's relationship to Juneteenth, I want to quote James Baldwin. He says, in What Price Freedom, quote, "In order to be free, you have to look into yourself and know who you are. At least know who you are and decide what you want, or at least what you will not have and will not be, and take it from there. People are as free as they wish to become," end quote. Earlier, he said, his freedom is, quote, "not yours to give me. Let us be clear about that. It is not a question of whether they are going to give me any freedom. I am going to take my freedom. That problem is resolved." Baldwin, as always, supplies in beautifully simple language a revelationary understanding of freedom as something personally defined and irrevocable. This isn't to say that one can be without freedom. Certainly they can, as the future tense of Baldwin's statement, "I am going to take my freedom," attests, right? But his quote seems to suggest that one cannot have their freedom taken from them. Only cede it to others by permitting them to define who you are and to accept what you cannot accept. The knowledge of self and the refusal to live in any way but authentically as who one is, that thing which Baldwin defines as freedom, bears a high cost in the annals of American history. To take one's freedom prior to the Emancipation Proclamation often entailed death. And in the century between the first Juneteenth and Baldwin's speech, the situation was not always very different. Folks were nominally free. There was often a great deal of play between the name of a thing and its reality on the ground. It has been over 60 years since then. The wheels of progress turn slowly, but Baldwin's understanding of freedom seems as undeniable now as it did then, and it is, I think, the one that informs the Gathering Table's understanding of Juneteenth. Juneteenth here isn't a celebration of federal troops arriving in Galveston, Texas, because those troops did not give our narrator his freedom. He has his freedom because he knows who he is as much as any child can. That knowledge will, of course, change as he grows. It will grow with him. But for now, he has a very clear understanding that the person he is was forged by his family, and in no small way by place. Within the sphere of that family, within the sphere of that world, he has had the space to learn about himself and his world without fear and with constant love. And it's clear that he will not abide a world where those things don't exist. Celebrations around the Gathering Table thus exist to honor that family, regardless of their nominal function, Easter, Christmas, etc. Whether the fireworks represent the New Year or some other holiday undefined, they serve merely as an excuse to call the community back together for communion. And the ability to hold such celebrations in safety, free from fear, and free to love, the narrator tells us, is Juneteenth. Neither a single event nor a single day, but an encapsulating, world-making, and foundational freedom, born in the individual and shared in the community. That community, as the Pan-African flag the narrator waves suggest, is a large and abiding one. That meaning is going to be lost on younger readers. But the act of reading to a child impacts both the speaker and their audience, right? We are touched by every word we consume, and that's one reason to read this beautiful book. Among the many others are the windows that can open to your child to expose them to a world forged in love and passionately free, even through what may be very quotidian and normal processes of holiday communion. Juneteenth is a holiday with an unimaginably violent and bloody history. It is also a holiday that reclaims a future from that darkness in which love, family, and community become unassailable bulwarks and pillars upon which future generations might build. This book explains that in far fewer words, with much better pictures, and to an audience that will understand its message intrinsically. On to the scoring. I mentioned earlier that Ladd's expressions seemed generalized, almost monosyllabic, and postulated that this was actually a facet of the narrator wresting control of the illustrator's gaze. And I do think that there's something there, but I also think that's a lot of very heavy reading, right? I'd like to see a bit more nuance there. Still, I recognize that these are actually human faces being rendered, not cartoonish caricatures who mimic emotion with slight changes in the thin lines that represent their lips or in the preternaturally wide eyes that transmit emotion like lighthouse beacons and not like humans. His landscapes shine. So, overall, a 3.9 for illustrations. As for the story, a 3.4. Everything is right about this except the 2 moments of comedic relief that break the spell of Spanish moss, live oaks, and happy voices gathered around a table. The first of these is the narrator's reaction to his grandparents kissing. The second is his reaction to his little sister's soiling of her diaper. And both of these are realistic moments, grounded like childhood itself in the body, but they nevertheless seem out of place, and they make the story stumble. I hear and read so much ventriloquizing. Good Lord. I hear and read so much ventriloquizing about what children's literature ought to be, how it needs to be alive and jump off the page with humor and light. But in my experience, kids are fine with poetics at the right time. And the poetics of this book deserve to be unbroken. I think the kids can handle it just fine. For repeatability, the Gathering Table proves both short and lyrical, and its illustrations offer a variety of Easter eggs, and that's a great combination. This one can take as long or as little as you like in the reading, and thus it earns a fairly high score of 3.8. For my score, you may not be able to tell, but I'm really quite fond of this. The landscapes remind me of home. The food reminds me of home. The family is nostalgic too, though this was not my experience with family. I love that the narrator has such scaffolding in his life, and I join the author in wishing sincerely for every child to have the same. 4.2 for me here. Addie also really seems to love this book. Her attention is always rapt when we read it. She's always studiously poring over the illustrations, and she often calls me back to a previous page to better understand what she's seen. We firmly entered the "what that mean" portion of her childhood, and she seems quite satisfied with Juneteenth being a holiday. We'll learn so much more together as the years go by. Right now, 3.6 for her. That's a final score of 19.1 out of 25, good for 17th place overall at the moment. So, all in all, if you're looking for a book to help explain Juneteenth to your child, this one should be in your lineup. Depending on their age, you may want to add more detailed accounts that delve into history and reasons. But I think you'd be remiss to miss this chance to show them precisely how every day ought to be Juneteenth. Not just for the African American community, but for all of us to celebrate the freedom that this offers. Happy Juneteenth, joyous Juneteenth to all of you. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, get your kids to the library, and as always, keep on reading together. Bye, y'all.
This has been Toddling the Stacks. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube or your podcatcher of choice for new episodes every Monday, and follow us on Insta, Blue Sky, and Facebook for the latest updates. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. Keep up with Adeline's reading now, find links to buy your favorites, and more at toddlingthestacks.com. Address questions or concerns to pod, that's P-O-D, at toddlingthestacks.com. Graphics for today's show were created by Emily Tatro. Make a website so people can hire you, Emily. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.